German POW doctors were stunned when black army medics treated them like colleagues. "We do not take orders from your kind. You are nicht qualifiziert, not qualified to touch a German officer." "Doctor, your man is bleeding out. I'm qualified, I'm here, and I'm going to save his life whether you approve or not." The words hung in the cold air of the makeshift field hospital outside Remagen, Germany, March 1945. Captain James McClendon, a black army medic from Birmingham, Alabama, stood across an operating table from Oberstarst Dr. Friedrich Weber, a German military physician who had just watched his world collapse along with the bridge his men had failed to defend. Between them lay a young German soldier, maybe 19, with shrapnel wounds that were draining his life onto the canvas floor. Dr. Weber's face was a mask of contempt and confusion. He had been taught, had believed for 12 years, that the man standing across from him was subhuman, incapable of complex thought, certainly incapable of practicing medicine. Yet this black American officer was calmly preparing instruments with the practiced efficiency of a surgeon, his hands steady, his eyes focused on the patient with professional detachment that Weber recognized because it mirrored his own. He shouted, "You cannot let a Negro touch a German officer. This is degradation." "This is worse than death." James ignored him, focused on his patient, but the lieutenant grabbed James's arm. "You will not touch him." Marcus stepped forward, but before he could intervene, Dr. Weber moved. He placed himself between the lieutenant and James, his voice carrying the authority of rank and years. "Lieutenant, stand down. That is an order." "But Herr Oberstarst," "I said stand down. This man is a qualified surgeon. Major Reinhardt will die without immediate surgery." "Would you have him die to satisfy your ideology?" the lieutenant stammered. "But this is not proper." "What is not proper," Weber said with sudden heat, "is allowing a soldier to die when a qualified physician can save him. Captain McClendon is that physician. Now get out of his way or I will have you restrained." The lieutenant stepped back, shocked into silence by Weber's vehemence. James had not stopped preparing during this exchange. "Dr. Weber," he said calmly, "can you assist?" "I'll need someone to retract." This was the moment. Weber could refuse, could step away, could maintain the comfortable fictions of racial hierarchy even as a man died, or he could do what his medical oath demanded. Weber washed his hands, put on a surgical gown, and took his position across the table from James McClendon. "Ready," Weber said. "Scalpel," James said to the nurse. The surgery took 47 minutes. James worked with absolute confidence, his hands steady, his decisions quick and correct. Weber assisted, retracting tissue, clamping vessels, watching a master surgeon navigate one of the most difficult emergency procedures in trauma medicine. James found the torn artery, clamped it, repaired it with neat, precise sutures, checked for additional damage, and closed with layered stitches that would heal cleanly. "Pulse is strengthening," Marcus reported from his position monitoring vital signs. "Blood pressure coming up, respiration steady." James stepped back from the table, pulling off his bloody gloves. "He'll make it. Keep him sedated for 12 hours, watch for pneumothorax, check the wound every 2 hours for signs of infection." He looked at Weber across the table. "Thank you, doctor, you're a skilled assistant." Weber felt something break inside him, some final barrier of ideology crumbling before the weight of reality. "Captain McClendon," he said formally, "you are an excellent surgeon. I am grateful to have learned from you today." James nodded, acknowledging the magnitude of what Weber had just said. "We're colleagues, Dr. Weber. That's all we ever should have been." Over the following days, the hospital settled into a rhythm. Weber and his German team worked alongside the American medics, the color line that should have divided them becoming increasingly irrelevant in the face of medical necessity. Patients survived or died based on their injuries and the skill of their treatment, not on their nationality or the color of their doctor's skin. Klaus became particularly close to Marcus, the two young men discovering a shared love of jazz music. Marcus had brought a small radio with him, and late at night, when the hospital was quiet, they would listen to Armed Forces radio playing Duke Ellington and Count Basie. "In Germany, they said this music was degenerate," Klaus confessed one night. "That it was inferior, corrupt. A lot of folks in America said the same thing," Marcus replied. "Didn't make it any less beautiful." Lieutenant Morrison developed a professional respect for Weber's diagnostic abilities. He had an almost uncanny ability to spot developing infections before they became critical, a skill honed by years of working with limited antibiotics. "How do you know?" she asked him after he correctly predicted sepsis in a patient whose vital signs were still stable. "Experience," Weber said, "and desperation. When you do not have drugs to treat infection, you learn to catch it early when the body might still fight it off. It is a skill I wish I had never needed to develop." 2 weeks after the bridge was taken, Major Reinhardt regained consciousness. He was still weak, still in pain, but alive. He asked his aide who had performed the surgery. The lieutenant, chastened by weeks of watching the hospital function, told him the truth. Captain McClendon, Herr Major. The American Negro doctor. Reinhardt was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I wish to thank him." James was called to the major's bedside. The two men looked at each other, the black American doctor and the German officer who had been taught that such a man was subhuman. "I am told you saved my life," Reinhardt said in halting English. "I did my job," James replied, "as I would for any patient. I was taught that men like you were not capable of such skill. I was taught many things that I now see were lies." Reinhardt paused, struggling with words and emotion. "I thank you, Captain, and I apologize for what I believed about you." James looked at this broken officer, this man who was confronting the collapse of his ideology along with the collapse of his nation. "Major, I don't need your apology for believing what you were taught. I need you to remember this, that when your life hung in the balance, it was saved by one of the people you were taught to despise. Maybe that knowledge will make you a better man in whatever comes after this war." In early April, orders came through. The German medical staff were to be transferred to a formal POW camp for eventual repatriation. The night before they left, Weber sought out James McClendon. They stood outside the church under a clear spring sky. The sound of artillery was distant now, the war moving east toward its inevitable conclusion. "Captain McClendon," Weber began, "I need to say something to you." "Go ahead. I was a fool. Worse than a fool, I was willfully blind. I believed things about you, about your people, that were not just wrong but evil. I believed them because they made me feel superior, because they justified things that should never be justified." Weber's voice was tight with emotion. "You showed me the truth through your skill, your professionalism, your humanity. You treated me as a colleague when you had every right to treat me as the enemy I was. I will carry that gift with me for the rest of my life." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dr. Weber, you know what the hardest part of this war has been for me? Not the surgery, not the death, not even the segregation. It's been wondering whether fighting to save a democratic world that doesn't consider me fully human makes me a fool." "You are no fool," Weber said firmly. "No," James agreed. "I'm not. Because I know something that took you a war to learn, that human dignity doesn't come from someone else's judgment. It comes from within. I'm a skilled physician because I worked to become one, not because someone gave me permission to be one. And when this war is over, I'm going back to an America that will still try to tell me I'm inferior. But I'll know better, because men like you finally learn to see the truth." Weber held out his hand. James took it, and the two doctors shook hands as equals, as colleagues, as men who had shared the sacred work of healing. "What will you do after the war?" James asked. "Go home to Munich if there is anything left of it. Try to rebuild, try to teach what I have learned." Weber paused. "And you?" "Go home to Birmingham, maybe open a practice. Keep fighting for the right to be seen as what I am, a man, a doctor, an American who served his country even when his country didn't fully serve him." The next morning, Weber and his team were loaded onto trucks. As they pulled away, Klaus looked back at the church, at the hospital where he had learned that everything he had been taught was a lie. "Herr Oberstarst," he said, "will anyone believe us when we tell them?" Weber thought about that. "Some will, some won't, but we will tell them anyway because the truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable." James watched the trucks disappear down the road. Marcus came to stand beside him. "Think he really learned something?" Marcus asked. "I think he learned that ideology breaks when it hits reality hard enough," James said. "Whether that makes him a better man in the long run, I don't know, but at least for a few weeks he had to face the truth." "And what about us?" Marcus asked. "We're going back to an America where we still can't eat at a lunch counter beside a white man." "I know," James said. "But Marcus, listen, we just proved something important. We proved that when lives are on the line, when skill and competence matter, all the racist nonsense falls away. We proved it to ourselves, and we proved it to men who had been taught from childhood that we were inferior. Maybe that knowledge will spread, maybe it won't, but we know it, and that's not nothing." The war in Europe ended 5 weeks later. Captain James McClendon returned to the United States in September 1945, carrying with him the memories of German doctors who had learned to see past their ideology and American soldiers who had learned to trust his skill despite their prejudices. He did not return to Birmingham. Instead, he settled in Detroit, where Marcus Williams helped him establish a practice. They treated black and white patients, and slowly, grudgingly, the white community began to accept that a black surgeon could be just as skilled as a white one. In 1954, 9 years after the war ended, James McClendon received a letter from Munich. It was from Klaus Hoffmann, now a practicing physician himself. Klaus wrote about the new Germany they were building, about the work of confronting the Nazi past, about the difficulty of making people understand what they had done and believed. But he also wrote, "I tell all my young medical students about the American Negro surgeon who treated German prisoners as colleagues, who saved a major's life without hesitation, who showed me that everything I had been taught was a lie. Some believe me, some don't, but I keep telling the story because it is true and because truth matters." James kept that letter in his desk drawer. On hard days when patients questioned his qualifications or made racist comments, when the long fight for civil rights seemed overwhelming, he would take out the letter and read it again. A reminder that minds could change, that prejudice could be confronted with competence and dignity, that the work of healing extended beyond the body to the soul. Dr. Friedrich Weber did return to Munich. He found his home destroyed, his wife a widow from a bombing raid, his world reduced to rubble. But he rebuilt, reopening his practice, training new doctors, and always, when he taught about trauma surgery, he would tell the story of the black American surgeon who had been a better doctor than most white physicians Weber had known. In 1963, as America convulsed through the civil rights movement, an aging Friedrich Weber watched the March on Washington on television. He saw Martin Luther King Jr. speak of his dream, and he thought about a church in Remagen where that dream had been lived, briefly, imperfectly, but genuinely. He wrote a letter to the U.S. Army Medical Corps trying to find Captain James McClendon. The letter found its way to Detroit, to a 63-year-old surgeon who still practiced 3 days a week. Weber's letter was simple. "I wanted you to know that you changed my life, and through me, perhaps changed a small corner of the world. The students I taught, the doctors they became, they know that human worth is not measured by race. This seed you planted in a damaged church during a terrible war, it grew, not as fast as it should have, not as far as it needs to, but it grew. Thank you, my colleague, my teacher, my friend." James wrote back. The two doctors corresponded until Weber's death in 1968, sharing the small victories and large frustrations of men who had learned hard truths and tried to live by them in an often resistant world. Marcus Williams, who had stood watch over so many operating tables, became a nursing educator after the war. He trained a generation of black nurses who went on to integrate hospitals across America. He never forgot the nights listening to jazz with a young German medic who had discovered that the music his government had called degenerate was actually beautiful. The church in Remagen still stands, restored after the war, its walls once again whole. A small plaque commemorates its use as a field hospital in 1945, though it doesn't mention the particular drama of race and ideology that played out within those walls. But the men who were there, who witnessed doctors of different races and nations working together to save lives, they remembered. And some of them told their children, and their children told others, and the ripples of that small moment spread outward through time. Because here is the truth that James McClendon understood and Friedrich Weber learned. Competence has no color, skill has no nationality, and the human capacity for healing, both physical and moral, transcends all the artificial boundaries we create. The Black Army medics who treated German prisoners as colleagues weren't just practicing medicine. They were proving, through simple professional excellence, that the ideology of racial superiority was a lie. They proved it in the most fundamental way possible, by saving lives while others watched, by being so undeniably skilled that even men trained to see them as inferior had to admit the truth. It was a quiet revolution, carried out with scalpels and sutures rather than speeches and protests. But it mattered. Every soldier saved, every wound healed, every moment of professional respect between men who should have been enemies, it all mattered. And on those nights when James McClendon lay awake, thinking about the long road still ahead for civil rights, about the battles still to be fought, about the progress still to be made, he would remember the look on Dr. Weber's face when he finally saw the truth. That moment when years of indoctrination crumbled before the weight of reality. That look gave James hope. Because if a German military doctor raised in the heart of Nazi ideology could learn to see a black man as an equal, as a colleague, as a fellow healer, then surely America, with all its stated ideals of equality and justice, could learn the same lesson. It would take time. It would take struggle. It would take sacrifice and courage and the steady, persistent work of millions of people refusing to accept injustice. But it was possible. James had seen it happen in a damaged church beside the Rhine in the spring of 1945, when German POW doctors were stunned to discover that Black Army medics could treat them like colleagues, and in doing so, revealed the lie at the heart of their entire worldview. The truth, James learned, was the most powerful medicine of all. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below.